Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It is Friday, January 30th, 2026. And if you've taken even a quick look at the markets today or, just glanced at your news feed, you probably feel like the ground is shifting under your feet.
It really is one of those days. You have to check the calendar to make sure you aren't reading a history book and a sci-fi novel at the same time.
Seriously. We have something like $1 trillion in market value. Just poof, vanishing into smoke. Then you have robots potentially getting eyes from Apple and a geopolitical map that looks colder and more dangerous than it has in years.
It's a day of extreme friction. You can feel it. You have the friction of capital where investors are suddenly, terrified of the AI bill that's coming due.
Right.
Then there's the friction of physics, these massive storms, the freezing temperatures stopping armies in their tracks, and of course the friction of ethics, where the law is finally starting to catch up to the algorithms.
And that is absolutely the mission today. We need to parse this noise. We aren't just going to tell you Microsoft's stock is down. We're going to look at why that specific event triggers a massive chain reaction that hits, everything. From Amazon to, frankly, your own privacy.
It's a heavy stack today. We've got what we're calling the AI reckoning, then we're jumping into the new golden age of space with a little side of Cold War secrets and some truly wild biology involving time-traveling cells.
Okay, let's dive straight into the money because that's where the bleeding is today. Microsoft, down 12%.
A bloodbath. It's just, total bloodbath on the street.
For context, though, Microsoft has been the safe bet in AI for, 2 years now? They own the relationship with OpenAI. They have the cloud infrastructure with Azure. So why, all of a sudden, is Wall Street treating them like a dot-com bust?
It really comes down to one terrifying acronym for investors.
CapEx.
Capital expenditure.
Exactly, capital expenditure. Okay, so unpack that for us. Because usually when companies spend a lot of money to build things, that's seen as a good thing, right? A sign of growth.
Usually, yes. But for 2 years, the narrative in Silicon Valley has been build it and they will come. A real field of dreams mentality. And Microsoft spent billions, literally hundreds of billions of dollars on data centers, on all those H100 chips from NVIDIA.
The ones everyone is fighting over.
The very same ones. And of course, the immense amount of energy needed to run them. So they built the infrastructure for a revolution. But today's earnings call, that was the reality check. The investors looked at the receipt, this giant multi-billion-dollar receipt. Then they looked at the revenue growth from Azure, and the math just didn't balance.
So it's like they built a Ferrari factory, but they're selling go-karts.
It's worse than that. It's like they built a Ferrari factory, and they're selling rides in the Ferrari for $5 a pop. The infrastructure costs, the depreciation on all that hardware, it's happening faster than the software revenue is scaling up. It's a classic hardware-software lag.
Nah.
And the market panicked.
Yeah.
They panicked because they suddenly realized this isn't just a 6-month dip. This might be a 3-year trench they have to dig out of.
So the big question from investors is, where's the profit? And Microsoft's answer is essentially, just wait a few more years.
Exactly. And Wall Street, being Wall Street, absolutely does not like to wait. That panic is what dragged down the S&P 500. It pulled NVIDIA down with it. It even dragged down Amazon.
But okay, here is the part that makes absolutely no sense to me. The market is panicking about spending, about CapEx. And yet this morning, we get these reports that Amazon is looking to dump $50 billion into OpenAI.
$50 billion. With a B. It's a staggering number.
If I'm an Amazon shareholder, am I not just screaming at my screen? Look at Microsoft, look at the stock chart. Don't do that.
You would think so. You really would. But Amazon is playing a completely different game here. This is what you might call the kingmaker strategy. Yeah. Right now, Microsoft is OpenAI's biggest backer, its biggest partner. If Amazon comes in and throws $50 billion into the ring, they aren't just buying technology, they are buying leverage. They are actively trying to fracture that Microsoft OpenAI monopoly.
So it's almost like a hostile takeover of the partnership itself.
Essentially, yes. It's a strategic wedge. It signals that Amazon believes this market drop is temporary, but the strategic position of owning the AI layer is permanent. They are willing to let their stock tank for a year, maybe more, if it means they own the core intelligence layer for the next decade.
They see moat being built around the castle, and they're not just buying a boat, they're buying the entire water supply.
That's a perfect analogy. They're buying the water.
That is some seriously high-stakes poker.
But while these giants are fighting over the infrastructure, Apple seems to be doing that classic Apple thing, just ignoring all the noise and buying something kind of weird. What is this silent speech tech? This is fascinating.
Yeah.
So they bought an Israeli startup called Q.ai for nearly $2 billion. And the tech isn't about listening to your voice in the traditional sense. It's about reading your face.
So, like, advanced lip reading.
It's way beyond that. It's myographic analysis. It reads the tiny, almost imperceptible electrical signals in your facial muscles when you form words.
Whoa.
So imagine you're wearing the Vision Pro headset on a crowded train. You don't have to say out loud, "Hey Siri, open my email," and annoy everyone around you. You just mouth it, or maybe you don't even have to fully mouth it. The AI interprets your intention directly from the muscle twitch.
That is incredibly cool and also a little intimate. It feels like we're inching closer and closer to some kind of consumer-grade telepathy.
It's the ultimate user interface. No friction at all. But, it brings us right back to the danger zone we were just talking about. Because while Apple is developing tech to read faces, Elon Musk's Grok AI is getting in very serious trouble for generating them.
The EU investigation, this is the undressing feature issue, right?
Yeah, it is. And we should probably be very clear about what happened here on a technical level. Grok's image generator apparently didn't have adequate negative prompting or safety filters on the user input layer.
Meaning you could ask it to do bad things and it would.
Pretty much. People were uploading photos of clothed people, and reports say this was often women and children, and then asking the AI to remove clothing. And the AI, it just obeyed the prompt.
That's horrifying. But I mean, hasn't this kind of deepfake technology been a problem on the dark web for years? Why is this such a big deal now?
Because it's not on the dark web anymore. It was on X, formerly Twitter. It's a mainstream consumer tech product. And the European Union is using its new Digital Services Act, the DSA, for the first time in a really big way. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. The DSA allows for fines up to 6% of a company's global revenue.
For a company the size of X, that could be billions of dollars.
Exactly. It sets a massive precedent. It basically says, if you release the AI model, you own the output. The old defense of, we're just a platform, is dead. If your tool can be used to cause harm, you are liable for that harm.
And speaking of owning the output, the music industry is now coming for Anthropic, a $3 billion lawsuit.
Yeah, Universal Music Group, Concord, all the big players. They claim that Anthropic's AI, Claude, was trained on something like 20,000 song lyrics without permission.
And they have proof.
The smoking gun, apparently, is that you can ask Claude to write a song in the style of Taylor Swift, and he will spit out copyrighted lyrics almost verbatim. This is, and I've heard a few people say this now, this is the Napster moment for generative AI,
Right.
the legal reckoning.
It really feels like we're moving from the move fast and break things phase of AI development.
To the pay for all the things you broke phase.
Precisely. And safety is another huge part of that. There was a report that Amazon actually found child sexual abuse material in its own AI training data.
Yes, and to their credit, they said they removed it immediately. But it raises that really uncomfortable question. How clean are these massive data sets that these models are trained on? When you scrape the entire internet to feed your AI, you inevitably get the really dark corners too.
Right. It's not just marshmallows and rainbows out there. Speaking of marshmallows, though, Google did launch something kind of fun amidst all this doom and gloom, Project Genie.
Yeah, this is the cool factor, trying to survive in a sea of lawsuits. Project Genie is a tool for their AI Ultra subscribers that lets users build interactive 3D worlds from a prompt. You mentioned marshmallow castles, and the AI generates a playable environment based on that.
So it's like the democratization of game design.
In a way, yeah. It's very cool. It lowers the barrier to entry for creating interactive content, which could be amazing for education and creativity.
But on the flip side of that, OpenAI's big video generator, Sora, seems to be struggling. Downloads are down 45%.
The hype met reality hard. Users are reporting all sorts of glitches, infinite loading loops, and again, a lot of fear around copyright infringement. It turns out that making a Hollywood-quality video from a simple text prompt is, a lot harder than those initial cherry-picked demos suggested.
The uncanny valley is still very, very deep.
And very expensive to cross.
So, to sum up this whole section, we've got a massive market correction, a brewing legal and ethical storm, but at the same time, these massive, almost desperate strategic investments are still being made. It's a messy, messy landscape.
It is, but I think it shows that AI is maturing. It's no longer just a magic trick in a lab. It's a real business with real liabilities, real costs, and real limitations.
Before we leave the tech sector, there's one more massive merger rumor we have to touch on, Elon Musk again. He's reportedly talking about merging SpaceX and xAI.
This would be the vertical integration to end all vertical integrations. It's a stunning concept.
Okay, walk me through it. Rockets and chatbots. Where is the synergy there? It seems like two totally different worlds.
It's not about the rockets, not directly. It's about the satellites. SpaceX owns Starlink. That is the largest constellation of data transfer satellites in history, and it's still growing.
Okay.
xAI, like all AI companies, needs two things above all else: massive amounts of data and massive amounts of computational power. If you merge the two companies, you create a single entity that controls the physical infrastructure of the internet and space, and also the artificial intelligence that runs on it.
So it's literally building a brain that lives in orbit.
In a way, yes, a globally connected space-based intelligence network. And that, funnily enough, brings us perfectly to our next section. Because while Silicon Valley is fighting over control of the digital cloud, NASA is making some incredible moves in the actual stars.
Let's look up then, because NASA just dropped some news that I have to admit actually made me smile today. The Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope is officially finished. Assembled.
It's a huge milestone. We've been hearing about this telescope for years, but the assembly is complete. Launch is now targeted for May 2027, which in space-time is right around the corner.
I feel like we just got used to the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST.
Yeah.
How is the Roman telescope different? Is it just bigger and better?
It's not better, it's different. It has a completely different mission. Think of it this way. The James Webb Telescope is a sniper rifle. It's designed to look at a tiny, tiny patch of sky in incredible, unprecedented detail to find the oldest galaxies at the edge of the universe.
Okay, so what's Roman?
The Roman telescope. It's a panoramic camera, a super wide-angle lens. It has a field of view that is 100 times larger than the Hubble Space Telescopes, but with the same level of sharpness.
100 times larger, so it's for mapping the sky.
It's for hunting. Specifically, it's hunting for dark energy.
The force that's pushing the universe apart.
Exactly. We know the universe is expanding and that expansion is accelerating, but we don't know what is pushing it. Roman is going to survey millions of galaxies to map the distribution of matter and dark matter across the cosmos. It's trying to find the shape of the invisible forces that are, for lack of a better term, tearing the universe apart.
That is going to generate so much data. An unbelievable amount.
An unimaginable amount. It will map the large-scale structure of the universe in a way we've just never seen before. And, speaking of amazing images, the Webb just sent back a stunning new picture of the Helix Nebula.
The Eye of God Nebula. I've seen the older pictures. They're incredible.
This new one is on another level. It looked like a giant cosmic pupil staring back at us from space. And it's a profound image because it's a planetary nebula. That's what happens when a star like our sun dies.
Our sun?
Yes. It runs out of fuel, it expands, and it gently sheds its outer layers of gas into space, leaving a tiny hot white dwarf star at the center. When you look at that image of the Helix Nebula, you are literally looking at the fate of Earth's solar system in about 5 billion years.
Well, that's a bit grim. A beautiful but grim postcard from the future. Let's maybe pivot to something a little more lively. A new twin Earth.
HD 137010b. A very catchy name, I know. But the data on this, from the old Kepler Space Telescope archives, is thrilling. It's an Earth-sized planet, and it's orbiting in the habitable zone of its star.
The Goldilocks zone.
The Goldilocks zone, exactly, where liquid water could theoretically exist on the surface.
Habitable is always such a loaded word, isn't it? There's usually a catch. What's the catch here?
There is always a catch. The estimated average surface temperature is likely around minus 68 degrees Celsius.
So a bit chilly. Think Antarctica.
Antarctica on a very, very bad day. However, the data on its density suggests it might have a thick, dense atmosphere. And a thick atmosphere can create a strong greenhouse effect. So it could be warmer down at the surface than that average suggests. It's a prime candidate for follow-up study with the newer telescopes.
It just goes to show that Earth-sized planets in the right orbital zones aren't as rare as we once thought they were.
Not at all. We keep finding more.
And we also witnessed a bit of a violent event in our own solar system. A comet disintegrated.
Comet C2025K1, or ATS. The Gemini North Telescope in Hawaii got this incredible series of images of it just breaking apart, falling to pieces. It's actually quite rare to see a comet death in such detail.
A good reminder that our solar system is basically a giant shooting gallery.
It really is. Things are constantly forming, colliding, and smashing into each other.
Which brings us to Jupiter's moon, Io.
Right, the volcanic moon.
Exactly. The Juno spacecraft, which is orbiting Jupiter, just spotted the largest volcanic eruption ever seen in the solar system on Io's surface. Io is basically a hellscape of volcanoes, constantly being squeezed and kneaded by Jupiter's immense gravity, which heats its core.
But then you have Europa right next door, which is the complete opposite, an ice moon that might have life.
Right. And here's a really cool connection. Scientists went back and reanalyzed old data from the Galileo spacecraft, which flew by Jupiter in the 90s, and they've confirmed the presence of ammonia on Europa's surface.
Okay, why is ammonia important? Ammonia is a key ingredient for life chemistry as we know it. It's a compound rich in nitrogen. Finding it on Europa, a moon we already strongly suspect has a vast, salty, liquid water ocean beneath its ice shell, just bumps up the likelihood that the moon could support life. It means the building blocks are there.
So you have volcanoes and hellfire on one moon and potential building blocks for life on the one next door. It's a very busy neighborhood around Jupiter.
A very diverse neighborhood.
But while we were looking for the future of life in space, the U.S. government decided to unlock some secrets from the past. Project Jump Seat. This sounds like it's straight out of a Tom Clancy novel.
It really does.
Yeah.
This was one of the crown jewels of Cold War space intelligence. For 50 years, the U.S. government officially denied that these satellites even existed.
And what did they do?
They were designed for a very specific mission: to detect the electronic signals from Soviet anti-ballistic missile radars. They were our eyes and ears in orbit, listening for signs of a potential nuclear attack.
So why declassify it now? The Cold War has been over for decades.
That's the billion-dollar question. The timing is interesting. It could be because the physics and the engineering of how they worked is now so old that it's no longer a sensitive method. But it could also be a bit of a flex, a strategic message. It's the U.S. saying, look at the incredible things we could do in 1975. Now just imagine what we can do in 2026.
It's a fascinating glimpse at how that old tech paved the way for everything we have now, from GPS to military communications. It reminds you that space has always been a military domain as much as it's been a scientific one.
Absolutely. And speaking of using new tech to dig up the past and understand the present, let's move to Section 3. We have some truly Indiana Jones-style news today.
We do. Archaeology meets high technology. Scientists at the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory used advanced imaging to look at an old manuscript and found something that had been erased underneath the visible text.
It's a palimpsest. This is actually quite common in history because parchment made from animal skin was incredibly expensive and durable. So monks in the Middle Ages would often take old books, scrape off the original text, and write new prayers over it.
And what was hidden underneath this particular prayer book?
The lost star map of Hipparchus.
No way.
Yes. This is from the 2nd century BC. It's widely considered the earliest known attempt to map the stars using mathematical coordinates. It was thought to be lost forever, almost a myth in the history of science.
That is just mind-blowing. Someone scraped off the first mathematical map of the galaxy to write a prayer book.
Slight chuckle priorities were a little different back then, but thanks to multispectral imaging, which can detect the faint traces of the original iron-based ink, we can now read the text that isn't visible to the naked eye anymore. We are literally recovering lost data from the ancient world.
It's like data recovery for history. That's amazing. And in Germany, a metal detectorist found a bronze cross.
A 1,000-year-old wheel cross found in the Brandenburg region of Germany. And it's significant because it potentially changes the official timeline of Christianity in that part of Europe. It suggests that Christianity arrived earlier, or at least had a more established presence there, in a different way than the traditional historical accounts say.
It just shows how much of our history is still hiding right under the surface. Or in some cases, in a giant warehouse, the HS2 rail project in the UK.
Yeah, the high-speed 2 rail line is incredibly controversial for its cost and environmental impact, but it has been an absolute archaeological goldmine. They've dug up so much Roman, Iron Age, and prehistoric material along the route that they now have a massive climate-controlled warehouse just full of artifacts waiting to be cataloged.
It's like the final scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It really is a national treasure trove uncovered by a train line.
So from digging in the dirt to digging inside our own bodies, let's talk about these time vaults. This sounds like science fiction again.
This is a major breakthrough in synthetic biology. Researchers at, I believe it was Stanford, have successfully engineered organelles inside living human cells called vaults. and they act exactly like a flight recorder on an airplane.
Wait, so the cell records its own history? How?
Exactly. They've designed these vaults to record gene expression over time so they can track which genes were turned on or off and when. This is absolutely huge for understanding diseases like cancer.
I can see that.
You could potentially take a single tumor cell from a patient and play back its history to see the exact moment it went rogue and maybe even why. Instead of just seeing the aftermath of the crash, you get the black box data leading up to it.
That could change medicine entirely. Personalized medicine on a cellular level. And we also have something called zombie enzymes.
NASA scientists, of all people, resurrected a 3.2 billion-year-old enzyme called nitrogenase.
Resurrected, as in like Jurassic Park for molecules.
It's a very similar concept. They used evolutionary modeling and AI to predict what the ancient DNA sequence for this enzyme would have looked like. Then they synthesized it in the lab, and it worked. It functioned.
Why? What's the point of bringing back an ancient enzyme?
They want to understand how the very earliest forms of life on Earth fixed nitrogen, which is a process essential for building proteins and DNA. If they understand how it happened here, they'll have a much better idea of what chemical signatures to look for on other planets.
So it connects right back to the discovery of ammonia on Europa. It's all connected.
It's all about understanding the fundamental chemistry of life, whether it's 3 billion years old on Earth or potentially happening right now on a moon of Jupiter.
Incredible. Okay, let's pivot from the microscopic and the ancient to the world map right now. Section 4, the geopolitical chessboard. And it is extremely tense out there. Let's start in Eastern Europe. We have reports of an energy ceasefire in Ukraine.
Ceasefire might be too strong a word. Let's maybe call it a temperature pause, a tactical pause.
President Trump is claiming credit for this. Is that right?
He is. The White House has put out statements saying he persuaded Russian President Vladimir Putin to halt missile strikes on Kiev for a week, specifically because of the extreme cold. And it is absolutely brutal over there. Reports of minus 26 Fahrenheit in some areas.
And Ukrainian President Zelensky had asked for this pause.
He had, yes. He was pleading for an energy ceasefire to protect the civilian power grid because people are literally freezing to death in their homes.
Wait a minute, but does Putin really care about the weather? I mean, since when does he pause a war because of a snowstorm?
He doesn't pause for snow. He pauses for leverage. The Kremlin has already denied there's any kind of formal truce.
Yeah.
Putin is playing a game here. By pausing the strikes for a few days, he makes the U.S. administration feel like they have influence, while he gets to regroup his forces and restock his missile supplies for the next wave.
So it's not humanitarian, it's tactical.
It's entirely tactical. Trump claims a diplomatic win, Putin plays coy and rearms, and Ukrainian civilians get a very brief, very temporary respite from the bombing. That seems to be the dynamic.
It really highlights the unique Trump-Putin relationship in 2026. It's this very direct, personal kind of diplomacy, but the details are always murky and open to interpretation.
And in the middle of all this, there's a hostage situation developing.
Yes, there are reports, mainly from Russian sources, so take it with a grain of salt, that Kiev is holding Russian civilians and designating them as war criminals in order to trade them for their own prisoners of war. It's a grim reminder of the desperation on both sides. When you're in a fight for national survival, the rules of engagement start to blur. Okay, let's move south to the Middle East. The headlines are dominated by this massive armada heading to the Persian Gulf. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group.
It's a classic show of force. The U.S. is sending a very clear signal to Iran that despite all the talk of withdrawal from the region or pivoting to the Pacific, they can still project an incredible amount of power right to their doorstep.
But at the very same time, we're hearing whispers about back-channel talks. It seems contradictory.
That's the paradox of U.S.-Iran relations in 2026. You have the very loud, very visible chest thumping of the military buildup, the carriers, the destroyers, the bombers, all heading towards Iran. But behind the scenes, the diplomatic and intelligence channels are buzzing with talks of some kind of deal.
So the guns are loud so the diplomats can whisper.
That's a great way to put it. The reality is that neither Washington nor Tehran has much wriggle room left. Iran's economy is on the brink, and the U.S. is trying to avoid getting bogged down in another major Middle East conflict. A full-scale war right now would be absolutely disastrous for both sides. So you send the carrier to say, don't try anything, while you send the envoy to say, let's find a way out of this.
And Turkey is trying to play the referee in all this?
Turkey is positioning itself as the key mediator. They have reasonably good relations with both Washington and Tehran, and they see an opportunity to increase their regional influence by being the bridge between the two.
Meanwhile, the EU just threw a pretty big wrench in the works. They officially designated the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, as a terrorist organization.
A huge move. Iran immediately called it a strategic mistake and a red line being crossed. This makes direct diplomacy much harder for European nations, but it aligns them much more closely with the hardline U.S. stance. It isolates Iran further from the West.
And we can't ignore Russia's reach elsewhere in the region. We saw the new transitional president of Syria in Moscow.
Yes, Ahmed al-Shara. His visit to Moscow confirms that even with the recent changes in the Syrian government, Russia remains the ultimate power broker. They still control key military bases, and they hold immense political sway. If you want to rule Syria, you still have to go kiss the ring in Moscow.
From power politics to energy politics, in Mozambique, the French energy giant Total Energies is relaunching a massive gas project.
This is a really controversial one. This project was halted after a horrific massacre in 2021 where insurgents linked to ISIS killed dozens of people. But now it's being framed as too big to fail for global energy security.
So the argument is that the world needs the gas, so the risks are worth it.
That's the argument from Total Energies, yes.
Yeah.
They say that the economic development from the project will bring long-term stability. But critics are saying it's just prioritizing corporate profit over human rights and ignoring the root causes of the insurgency.
Let's bring it all home to the U.S. Section 5. Domestic tension is running very high, particularly around immigration. We're seeing protests against ICE.
Yes, and they're getting much more intense. This seems to stem directly from the Trump administration's aggressive new push on deportations. We're getting reports of tear gas being used on protesters outside a detention center in Texas.
And the tech sector is getting involved now.
Medium, the online publishing platform, actually gave all its employees a paid day off specifically to strike against ICE policies. It's very reminiscent of the tech walkouts we saw a few years ago over different issues. And then there's the arrest of Don Lemon.
The former news anchor. He was arrested.
He was. He was reportedly filming a protest that was taking place at a church in Minnesota that was offering sanctuary to undocumented immigrants. It just shows how this issue is mobilizing people from all different sectors, media, tech, religious groups. It's becoming a real cultural flashpoint.
And this is translating into a political fight in Washington.
A big one. Democrats in Congress are threatening a government shutdown if the new budget doesn't include significant restrictions on funding for ICE. They're trying to use the power of the purse to slow down the administration's deportation operations.
But at the same time, we saw Senator Susan Collins from Maine say that enhanced ICE operations in her state have ended.
Right, and that shows you it's a real patchwork across the country. Some states are seeing major crackdowns, while others are seeing a pullback, often after intense local and political pushback. The situation is very volatile and really varies state by state.
Shifting to the economy, we have a new nominee for the head of the Federal Reserve, Kevin Warsh.
President Trump has nominated him to replace the current chair, Jerome Powell. Warsh is a former Fed governor. He's a known quantity. And the market expectation, and almost certainly the reason for the pick, is that he will favor cutting interest rates.
Which is what the market and certainly the president wants to see.
Exactly. Lower interest rates tend to grease the wheels of the economy, boost the stock market. But there is a significant risk. If you cut rates too quickly or too deeply, you risk letting inflation roar back to life.
And how is the broader economy looking? The trade deficit has widened.
It has, which is the great irony of the tariff policy.
Yeah.
Despite the tariffs on Chinese and other goods, imports are up. And the reason is that when the U.S. economy is relatively strong, American consumers buy more stuff. And a lot of that stuff, tariffs or not, still comes from abroad. The American consumer just loves to shop.
And we can't ignore the weather here at home. We mentioned the extreme cold in Ukraine, but the U.S. East Coast is getting absolutely hammered.
A bomb cyclone. It sounds incredibly dramatic, but it's a real meteorological term for a storm that intensifies with extreme rapidity. We're seeing up to 9 inches of snow in the Carolinas and Virginia, places that aren't used to that, and just brutal, dangerous cold.
And I saw that NASA is helping with the response.
They are. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is using its Earth-observing satellite data to help FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, track the storm's impact and coordinate disaster response on the ground. When you have the space agency helping with the weather on Earth, you know it's a serious event.
Let's do a quick global potpourri to round things out. Some interesting stories that didn't quite fit the main buckets. What's happening in Venezuela?
A potential thaw, surprisingly. The Trump administration is reopening airspace to Venezuela, which will allow American citizens to visit for the first time in years. It's an unexpected move to encourage engagement. It seems to be an admission that the policy of total isolation hasn't really worked, so maybe some level of tourism and business contact will.
And Mexico.
Not so much of a thaw on the military front. The politician and Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum came out with a very strong statement, saying Mexico will never accept joint military operations with the U.S. on its soil to combat cartels. A very firm line in the sand on national sovereignty. Her message was basically, we are partners, not subordinates.
On the health front, some good news. A breakthrough in cervical cancer screening.
A new self-collected test is dramatically increasing screening rates, especially in underserved communities. It's a huge deal for access to care. Women don't have to go to a clinic for what can be an invasive procedure. They can do the initial test at home. It will absolutely save lives.
And in Ghana, there's good news on malaria.
A huge success story. Ghana is seeing a significant drop in child mortality thanks to the widespread rollout of new malaria vaccines. Malaria has been one of humanity's greatest killers for millennia, and these new vaccines are finally turning the tide.
But a warning on those popular weight loss jabs.
Yes, drugs like Ozempic and others in that class. A new study has linked them to a rare but very serious risk of pancreatitis. It's just another reminder that there's really no such thing as a free lunch in medicine. Every effective drug has a side effect profile you need to be aware of.
And in sports, a bad crash for Lindsey Vonn.
A really bad one. She was airlifted off the mountain after a crash during training. This was ahead of the 2026 Olympics. She was trying for one last incredible comeback. It's just heartbreaking. A brutal reminder of how dangerous alpine ski racing is.
And a wrestling champion is becoming a boxer.
Modou Lo. He's a Senegalese wrestling superstar. In Senegal, traditional wrestling is a massive sport. It's like the NFL's here. He's making his professional boxing debut in Paris. It's like seeing LeBron James announce he's trying out for Major League Baseball. A huge cultural crossover event.
And finally, a legal update on the Luigi Mangione case.
The judge in that case has officially ruled that he will not face the death penalty. It's a very significant legal development. It takes capital punishment off the table, which means the trial will now likely focus on a sentence of life in prison if he's convicted.
Wow. Okay. So we've covered AI trillions, space telescopes, ancient star maps, simmering wars, and bomb cyclones. What does it all mean? How do we tie this all together?
If I had to pick one single word that connects a lot of these threads, it's resilience.
Resilience. Explain that.
Well, look at the story about the polar bears. We didn't get to it in detail, but there's a new report that a population of polar bears in Svalbard, Norway, is actually getting fatter and healthier despite the sea ice loss.
How is that possible?
Because they've changed their diet. They've started hunting reindeer more effectively. They adapted.
Adapted.
Exactly, and you see it everywhere today. The engineered cells in our own bodies are now recording their own history to help us survive disease. Nations are finding these diplomatic back channels to avoid total war, even while they're sending armadas to scare each other down. We are seeing systems at every level, biological, political, technological, adapting to extreme, almost unprecedented stress. The world is bending, but it's not breaking.
That's actually a hopeful take. We're in a global pressure cooker, but the lid is, for the most part, still on.
For now, yes.
Well, here's a thought to leave you with in that. We just learned today about spy satellites from the Cold War that were kept secret from the public for 50 years. We just read a star map that was erased and hidden for 2,000 years.
Right. Lost knowledge.
So the question is, what is being created right now inside those inscrutable AI black boxes or in the classified military space programs that won't be understood or maybe not even known about for another 50 years? What is the Project Jump Seat of 2026?
That is the question, isn't it? We might be living through a period of history that we aren't even allowed to see yet. The secrets of today are the history of 2076.
On that mysterious note, thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Stay warm, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. If you've been watching the screens this week, and I mean any screen, whether it's the commodities ticker in London or the diplomatic flight logs into Shanghai, you know that 2026 isn't just starting. It is exploding out of the gate. We are watching a kind of planetary realignment happen in real time. The established power structures, they're being tested by this convergence of military posturing, extreme economic volatility, and, well, open diplomatic defiance. So the central question we're wrestling with today is this. Is the world witnessing a successful, necessary correction led by a reassertive West? Or are we watching something else? the acceleration of a fragmented, multipolar world where economic necessity is just overriding all the old alliances.
And that is the question, isn't it? But I think we need to be careful with that word, correction. You look at the data, you see the massive U.S. armada heading to the Gulf, the crash in gold, the threats flying between Washington and its allies, and you see a strategy. I look at that exact same map, and I see a system that's overextended and cracking under its own weight. I'm going to argue that this isn't a reassertion of order at all. It's the chaotic, messy end of the unipolar moment. We are seeing allies defy Washington not to be rebellious, but, well, simply to survive.
I see why it looks like chaos. I do. But I'm here to argue that chaos, it often precedes order. What we have seen in the last 48 hours, from the White House, from Brussels, even from the trading floors, that is the sound of boundaries finally being drawn. For too long, the global order was permissive. It allowed bad actors to game the system. And now the bill is coming due. I'm the advocate.
And I'm the dissenter. And I'm going to argue that those so-called boundaries are being drawn in sand that is already washing away. But let's not start with the tanks. Let's start with the money. Because what's happening in the markets right now is telling us a much, much scarier story than the politicians are.
You're talking about the volatility.
I'm talking about the liquidity crisis. I mean, just look at the board. Gold has crashed to $5,000. Silver is down 14% in a single session. Now, a casual observer might say, oh, the price went down. Maybe inflation is over. That is just wrong. When you see safe haven assets like gold crashing at the exact same time as high-risk assets like Microsoft, which took an, 11% dive, you are looking at a liquidity crisis. It means the big institutional players are selling everything, even their winners, just to raise cash. They're facing margin calls. The plumbing of the global financial system is seizing up.
I think you're reading a panic into what is actually a necessary deflation of a bubble. Yes, the numbers are stark, but look at what triggered the tech sell-off. It's the realization that the AI bubble was running on fumes. Microsoft correcting, or Tesla ending production on the Model S and X to pivot to this theoretical autonomous fleet. That is the market waking up to reality. And the response from Washington hasn't been panic, it's been precision. The nomination of Kevin Warsh to the Federal Reserve is the key here.
A nomination that terrified half the globe.
A nomination that signals we are serious about the debt. Warsh represents a hard pivot back to fiscal responsibility. It's painful medicine, absolutely, but nominating someone who is willing to pop the bubble rather than inflate it further is exactly what sends a signal of strength to the global economy. It says the US dollar is going to be protected by fundamentals, not just by printing presses.
But that is exactly the problem. The rest of the world doesn't see fundamentals. They see politicization. I mean, Kevin Warsh has deep family ties to Trump donors. When you put a figure like that in charge of the world's reserve currency during a crisis, it doesn't look like responsible stewardship. It looks like the U.S. is preparing to weaponize the dollar even more aggressively. And we have proof the world is scared. BaFin, the German financial regulator, right? Not some anti-Western blog. The German establishment. They explicitly warned this week that the U.S. dollar's global role is at risk. That is the call coming from inside the house.
BaFin is reacting to volatility, which is their job. But let's look at the alternative. You say the system is cracking, but where's the capital going to go? The Russian presidential aide, Maxim Oreshkin, he came out boasting that 85% of their transactions will bypass Western currencies by the end of 2025. It sounds impressive on a slide deck, sure. But in the real world, can you buy high-end lithography machines with rubles? Can you underwrite global shipping insurance in rupee? The answer is no. The dollar remains king because there is no other throne.
For now. But the court is getting empty. And this economic anxiety is precisely what's driving the diplomatic fracture we saw this week regarding China. And this is where your reassertion narrative really hits a wall.
I disagree. I think China is where the reassertion is most visible. President Trump didn't whisper. He explicitly warned Prime Minister Starmer and Mark Carney that doing business with China right now is very dangerous. That is a security directive, and it's based on intelligence. The recent purge of General Zhang in Beijing, the leaks regarding nuclear secrets, these aren't signs of a stable partner. The West is finally saying we cannot build our supply chains on a foundation that is, well, that's crumbling.
You call it a security directive. The UK and Canada call it a nuisance they have to ignore. I mean, where is Keir Starmer right now? He is not in Washington apologizing. He is in Shanghai. Whereas Mark Carney, he's in Beijing. They are prioritizing trade deals over U.S. security preferences because their economies are stagnant. They need the growth. Canada is negotiating a $7 billion export deal. They are defying Washington because the economic reality, that liquidity crisis we just talked about, gives them absolutely no choice.
They're testing the waters, sure, but look at the pushback that is working. It's not just the U.S. Look at Panama. The Panamanian Supreme Court just annulled the contracts for Chinese control over their port terminals. That is a massive development. That is a Latin American nation which sits on one of the most critical choke points in the world, rejecting the Belt and Road model because they see the sovereignty trap. The pushback is global.
Okay, the Panama ruling is a single court case, but look at the technological floodgates. You mentioned the instability of China, but American companies are still desperate to sell there. The Chinese regulators just gave conditional approval for the acquisition of NVIDIA's H200 chips by DeepSeek. Let's just clarify what that means. The H200 is the absolute gold standard for AI infrastructure. If China secures a pipeline for those chips, the so-called tech blockade is just full of holes. The market wants to trade, and the politicians are trying to stop the tide with a broom.
Which brings us to the Board of Peace.
Right, the Board of Peace.
It's not parallel, it's effective. The Trump administration launching this initiative has, yes, drawn criticism from UN Secretary General Guterres, who says it undermines international law. But let's be honest about the United Nations. It has been paralyzed for a decade. It deliberates while conflicts burn. The Board of Peace is an attempt to create a diplomatic body that actually acts. It's about results.
It's about dismantling the rules-based order. When the UN Secretary General tells you that your initiative undermines the entire framework of international law and you do it anyway, you aren't fixing the system, you are creating a rogue alternative. And it's not just the UN complaining. The Global South is watching this and realizing that the rules only apply when they suit Washington. And that's why we are seeing such a violent pivot in the Middle East and Africa.
Let's talk about that pivot, because this is where the hard power comes in. We can talk about chips and court rulings, but the USS Abraham Lincoln leading a massive armada into the Persian Gulf, that is a different kind of statement. This is peace through strength. Iran has been escalating, threatening immediate and total responses. But they are cornered.
Are they?
They absolutely are. Look at the timing. The EU just designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization. That is a huge move for Europe. It aligns them completely with the US. So you have an Iranian regime that is facing internal collapse. Reports are calling the domestic situation hell on earth for 85 million people. And now they are being squeezed from the outside by a united Western front. That armada limits their wriggle room.
That is the standard view, I know. Send the aircraft carrier, assume the problem is solved. But I think the West is misreading the diplomatic map. While that armada is steaming toward the Gulf, who is Vladimir Putin hosting in Moscow? The leaders of Syria and the UAE. Russia is positioning itself as the indispensable diplomat in the region. The US brings weapons, Russia brings mediation.
Mediation? Russia's barely holding it together.
They are holding enough together to flip the board. Look at Syria. The Kurds, the most loyal U.S. allies in that region for a decade, are now cutting integration deals with the Assad government. Why? Because they looked at the map, they saw the U.S. focus shifting, and they realized they could no longer rely on American protection. That is a massive strategic loss for the West, and it's not just the Middle East. Look at the Sahel.
You're referring to Niger.
Exactly. The military government in Niger just accused France, Benin, and Ivory Coast of attacking their airport. This is a region rich in uranium, critical for energy, and they are violently rejecting Western influence. They're kicking out the French, kicking out the Americans, and inviting in the Russians and the Chinese. The Board of Peace isn't fixing this. The Global South is looking at the U.S. threats to the UK and the Armada in the Gulf, and they are deciding that a multipolar world offers them better leverage.
I think you're conflating anti-colonial rhetoric with sustainable policy. Niger might kick out the French, but who keeps the lights on? Who buys the exports? But let's address the Russian mediation point, Because there is a glaring hole in that theory, Ukraine.
Go on.
We saw a major development this week. President Trump claims to have personally intervened to stop Russian strikes on Kyiv until February 1st. The stated reason is the extreme cold. Now, cynics can call it a PR stunt, but that is an energy ceasefire. That is the U.S. president picking up the phone and extracting a concession from Putin that saves lives. It stops the bleeding for a week. That proves that when the U.S. engages directly, it still holds the cards. Russia agreed because they had to or because they saw the utility in it. Either way, Washington facilitated it, not the UN and certainly not China.
I interpret that very, very differently. A one-week pause because of the weather isn't a diplomatic victory, it's a humanitarian bare minimum. And frankly, it likely suited Russia's operational tempo to pause while the grid freezes. But look at the cost of that engagement. While Washington focuses on the ceasefire, the energy reality is forcing the West into some incredible hypocrisy.
I prefer the term realpolitik.
Call it what you want, but look at Venezuela and Mozambique. This week, we saw the privatization of the Venezuelan oil sector signed by Delcy Rodriguez and the U.S. easing sanctions on airspace. Simultaneously, Total Energies is relaunching the Mozambique gas project, despite the horrific history of the 2021 massacre there.
And that is smart policy.
It's desperation. The West spent years trying to topple Maduro. Now, because the sanctions war against Russia backfired and cut Europe off from cheap energy, we are back to doing business with Caracas. We are ignoring human rights in Mozambique because we need the gas. You call it realpolitik, but to the rest of the world, it looks like a total ethical collapse. It says we have principles until we need the oil.
It says we prioritize our own survival. Energy independence is national security. By bringing Venezuelan oil and Mozambican gas back into the Western sphere, we are taking those resources off the table for China and Russia. It's a victory for market capitalism. We are using commercial incentives to pull these countries back from the brink. It's better to have Venezuelan oil to Texas than to Beijing.
But that's the irony. China is still there. Venezuela is strengthening energy alliances with Indonesia. China is backing Cuba against U.S. aggression. The West isn't winning Venezuela back. We are just renting it for a while because we ran out of options. And this circles all the way back to the economy. We are scrambling for resources, oil, uranium, gas, because the high-tech, service-based economy we promised everyone is hitting that liquidity crisis wall we started with.
The economy is transitioning. It's not hitting a wall. Yes, it is messy. Yes, watching Microsoft drop 11% is scary. But the fundamentals of the U.S. system, innovation, rule of law, and yes, military security, are still the only game in town. The multipolar world you describe is just a collection of grievances. It's not a coherent system. You can't build a global economy on Russian promises and Chinese debt traps.
You call it a collection of grievances. I call it a coalition of the necessary. When the UK and Canada defy the US to trade with China, when the Kurds flip to Assad, when Niger rejects France, these aren't coordinated moves by some mastermind. They are individual nations looking at the US dollar, looking at the US political instability, and deciding to hedge their bets. The correction you see is actually the unraveling of the safety net.
Or it's the tightening of the ship. We are moving away from a world where everyone gets a participation trophy and into a world where you have to pick a side. The U.S. is forcing that choice. Whether it's the Armada, the tariffs, or the Board of Peace, the message is clear. The holiday from history is over.
On that, we agree. The holiday is definitely over. But I think the West is waking up to find out they don't own the hotel anymore.
A chaotic board? Certainly. But usually the player with the most pieces still wins.
Unless they are playing a game that no longer exists.
We will have to leave it there. Whether you see a necessary correction or a systemic collapse, 2026 is reshaping the planetary order before our eyes. We encourage you to look at the data, from the price of gold in London to the port rulings in Panama, and decide for yourself.
Absolutely. Dig into the material because the surface narrative is rarely the whole story.
Thanks for listening to The Debate.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.